Chapter 24. Dani pushed the grocery cart through the store, trying to find everything on her list. This was one thing she hated about moving, having to figure out where everything she bought was on the store shelves. In a month or two, she'd have it figured out, and shopping would take her about half the time. Until then, she was left searching. "Dani went, is that you?" a voice said from behind her. Dani turned to find a woman about her age, standing a few feet away. It took Dani a few seconds to recognize her. "It is, you're Marcy Lyons, right?" She and Marcy hadn't been enemies in school, not exactly. But they hadn't been friends, and there had been more animosity between them than anything else. Dani couldn't remember why though, and was willing to let it go. "I am." She nodded, then looked Dani up and down. For the first time in years, Dani was acutely aware she no longer had the lithe teenage body she'd once had. For a moment, she wanted to walk away just because she felt that way. She'd long ago left behind the petty competitions of high school, or at least she thought she had. She didn't like the feelings that seeing Marcy raised in her. She didn't walk away because she also knew that those feelings weren't Marcy's fault. "I heard you were back in town," Marcy continued. "I've only been back a few weeks. You look great. What are you up to these days?" "Oh, playing on the lake, dating, work, that's about it." Marcy's gaze settled for a moment on Dani's hand, as if noticing there was no ring. "Are you seeing anyone?" "No, I don't date much," Dani said. "I've just got too much going on." "That's a real shame. Half the fun to be had around here is playing with the tourists." Marcy gave her a predatory grin that sent a shiver down Dani's spine. She had never been into picking up people who would only be in the area for a couple days or a week, and Marcy's attitude that they were all good, temporary playthings made her uncomfortable, and always had. "I've just got too much going on." Dani gave Marcy a half smile and glanced down the aisle. She wanted to get her shopping done so she could get out of here, but she couldn't think of an excuse without telling Marcy about Mark, and for some reason, she didn't want to do that. "That's right." Marcy snapped her fingers as if she'd just remembered something. "You were too busy with Zach to be bothered with anyone else, until you left, that is?" "Yeah, I was pretty hung up on him." Dani couldn't help her smile turning more real, as she thought about all the time she and Zach had spent together as teens. "Have you seen him since you got back?" Marcy didn't give her a chance to answer. "He didn't say anything while we were at the hideaway the other day. There are only a few of our class left around the lake. I would think he would have mentioned it." The idea that Zach had been at the hideaway with Marcy, which may not be entirely true but was certainly how Marcy made it sound, turned Dani's stomach. She needed out of here. "I've seen him a couple times." Dani wasn't giving Marcy any more information than she had to. "It took me a bit, but I finally got to see why you weren't willing to see anyone else back then." Marcy smirked. "He really knows what he's doing, doesn't he?" Dani's stomach churned. She glanced at her watch. "I've really got to get going. I've got an appointment I can't be late for." "All right, honey. I'm sure I'll catch you again. This is such a small town and all." Marcy's smirk left no doubt in Dani's mind that she'd done exactly what she'd set out to do. Put doubts in Dani's mind about Zach. Dani walked away, the rest of her list forgotten. She took her cart to the register, quietly fuming. Had Zach been sleeping with that bitch? Now she remembered why they didn't get along. Partly because they were so different, but partly because Marcy couldn't live and let live. She existed to tear people down to make herself feel better. That kind of thing had annoyed Dani in school, now it turned her stomach. Finished in the store, Dani pushed the cart out to her vehicle, loaded the groceries inside, and left. She wanted to go confront Zach about whether he was seeing Marcy, but she was due to pick up Mark at his new friend's house, and couldn't. Instead, she let her anger and disgust simmer as she drove the 20 minutes to pick up their son. The worst of her anger had passed, but her stomach still churned every time she thought about Zach dating Marcy, and worse, telling her he wasn't seeing anyone and then kissing her. She would be no part of him cheating on anyone, even Marcy. Her chest ached and burned at the idea he would do something like that. She never would have believed it. Hell, she barely believed it now. Even the suspicion hurt. Marcy could have been lying. That thought had kept her sane for the last day and a half. She'd seen Zach, but not without Mark hanging on their every word, and she hadn't had a chance to ask him about Marcy and what she'd said. And it was a conversation to have face to face, though it was tempting to send a text and ask. Then he wouldn't be able to see the betrayal on her face, if it were true. She would ask him as soon as she could without little ears. If she found out Marcy had been lying, Dani wasn't sure she'd be able to resist the urge to slap that smug smile off Marcy's face. She pulled into Zach's driveway for the second time that day, as she dropped Mark off before work. This time, she got out and went inside. It had taken her a few days to realize Zach had really meant what he'd said about her being welcome anytime, especially if Mark was there, and he didn't want her knocking. Inside, she found Zach in the kitchen, which was where she'd come to expect him when she got here after work. "Where's Mark?" "In the other room." "More Legos?" "Video game today." "Where is the game?" She frowned, not remembering a TV in the room. He frowned at her a second, then shook his head. "On the TV in my bedroom." She nodded once, wondering how long he would be occupied, and if she should bring up Marcy. Might as well, it wouldn't get any better by not asking. "I was shopping yesterday, and ran into someone I used to know." "I imagine you did, there are a lot of people still here from before you left." He was only half paying attention to her, as he moved around the kitchen working on dinner. His claim that there were still a lot of people around was the opposite of what Marcy had said. She wasn't sure which to believe. No. She did know who to believe. As far as she knew, Zach had never lied to her. Marcy had proven long ago she was willing to do or say nearly anything to get what she wanted. Who was it? He looked up when she'd gone quiet. Marcy Lyons. She kept her eyes on him, watching for a reaction. Zach sighed and his shoulders dropped. "Give me a minute to get this to where it doesn't need attention and I'll explain." His voice wasn't angry or annoyed, more resigned. She waited, wondering what he would say. He didn't deny that he'd been seeing her. He didn't act like he'd been caught in a lie. The longer she waited, the more curious she became. "All right." Zach went to the sink, washed his hands, and picked up a towel to dry them on as he came around and sat beside her at the bar. "What did she say?" They both faced the counter. Zach set his elbows on the counter and leaned forward. "Why?" "So you can explain it away?" "No, so I know where to start." Dani turned to look at him, eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Are you seeing her? Currently or in the past?" And define seeing. "Currently." And dating, in a relationship. Her suspicion grew. "No, and never." "Excuse me?" "No, I'm not currently seeing her, and I've never dated or been in a relationship with her." "She said something that makes me doubt that." "What did she say?" He looked away as if he couldn't meet her eyes. "She didn't come out and say it, but she hinted that she slept with you." "She has." Pain shot through her chest as red flooded her vision. There was nothing else. She'd always heard about seeing red, but she never had, and she thought it was an exaggeration. Until now. Words failed her. Without thinking, she lifted one hand and slapped him across the face. Hey! What was that for? For sleeping with that bitch? Mark. She wasn't staying here any longer. Yeah, Mom? The boy appeared. Get your stuff, we're leaving. But what about dinner? I'll cook at home. Let's go. Wait. Let me explain. Zach set his hand on her arm. Dani looked down at it, then slowly lifted her eyes to look him in the face. Get your hand off me. She spoke through clenched teeth as she tried to keep from saying something she knew she'd regret. She couldn't stay. She had to get out of here. Send Mark out when he's ready. She stalked to the door and went out to the truck where she started it and waited. Thankfully, Zach realized now was not the time to screw with her and got Mark out in moments. Putting the little SUV in gear, she resisted the urge to peel out and throw gravel as she left, but only just barely.